Good afternoon, everyone. The time is now 4:05, and we would like to begin this meeting of the Resilience Design Review Committee. We will have a presentation from Priest and Nichols on the Gentilly Resilience District project at Dillard Wetlands. Before we move on from this screen, please take note of the chat function. If you'd like to chat, type questions into the chat. We'll start with introducing the members of the Resilience Committee. So I'm going to call out the members of the Resilience Committee by policy and ask for their designee to identify themselves. We'll start with Chief Resilience Officer or a member of the Office of Resilience and Sustainability. Do we have anyone here tonight for them? Okay. City Planning Commission. Do we have a representative from the City Planning Commission? Capital Projects Administration. Do we have a representative from the Department of Public Works?
Hey, this is Megan Williams. I'm the Stormwater Program Manager for Public Works.
Thank you, Megan. Do we have a representative from the Sewage and Water Board of New Orleans?
Yes, this is Grace Ogle from Sewage and Water Board.
Thank you, Grace. Do we have a representative from the Hazard Mitigation Office?
Yes, good afternoon. This is Austin Feldbaum from the Hazard Mitigation Office.
Thank you, Austin. And do we have a representative from the Office of Equity? Okay. And I think I skipped over someone. I do see that Travis Martin is with us from the City Planning Commission. Yeah, hey Travis, you have a little bit of background noise, so when we get into questions and comments, you may want to try calling in, or you may want to text your comments and questions into the chat.
The noise is coming from Matt Milano's computer. Or somebody else needs to mute him.
Great.
And also, I'm here from Parks and Parkways. Danny Wetland.
Yes, I was going to ask for the other city departments. So Danny, you're from Parks and Parkways, and I believe we also have Office of Transportation.
Yeah, hey Mary, this is Dan Jontris.
And Laura Bryan, here too, Mary.
Thank you, Laura. And I believe we also have North Sea.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Edgar Alexis.
Thank you, Edgar. Is there anyone else from the city that would like to identify themselves at this time? If you could just take yourself off mute and identify yourself, if you wish.
This is Mike Heron from Parks and Parkways.
Thank you, Mr. Heron. We're happy to have you aboard. So that's our roll call of the committee members. We'll now move into the presentation. As I said, tonight we have Joel and Nina here from Priest and Nichols. Joel?
Yeah, this is Nina Ryan. If you want to move on to the agenda, the next slide that has, I think, everybody's name, and I'll give a quick introduction. My name is Nina Ryan. I'm the project manager for the Wetlands project for Priest and Nichols and the design team. And we also will be sharing the presentation with Joel Tellery, who's the technical lead for the design, as well as Tatiana Cordova, who's our community engagement lead. With that, we'll just give a very brief overview, talk a little bit about the goals and benefits, introduce the community engagement that we've done so far and the the outputs we've received, and then really try to dive more into the concept design. Next slide. So I don't really, on the following slide, it's really just an overview, a map that all of you guys have seen plenty of times. If you go to the next slide about all the different projects that are part of the Gentilly Resilience District. And as you can see here, the Dillard Wetland is kind of a centerpiece of that. And we're very excited to have the design team working on this, consisting of Friesen Nichols, Thatcher, Eustace Engineering, and Waterblock, all part of our team. The project is a little bit unique in that it's a wetland that has been kind of a wetland forest throughout the years and hasn't been developed, as you can see here shortly on the next overview map. Next slide. And this is the project site. It's really looked like this since the 50s. Has never been developed. The adjacent school board property was developed, but then demolished after Katrina. And so now we have the opportunity to make this site a little bit more accessible. We've previously introduced pictures to show kind of what it looks like from the outside and from the inside, but really most people don't know about the site unless you live right next to it. Next slide. Is that we updated, by the way, the fact sheet that for this project, for this meeting. So that is also available on the city's website for this project, for this resilience project. So if you interested in that. This is 27 plus acres, and it's very low-lying forested wetland. And as I mentioned, it's a very unique site. It's kind of left over through kind of some of when the canal was the London Avenue Canal was stuck and kind of separating parcels, and there was kind of a property split switch and that made it the city's property. And which then allowed them to use the site now for this this particular project. Next slide. With that, we go to the goals and benefits. Next slide, please. All these goals are kind of, obviously there's a lot of similarities between the project of different goals. But in this case, it's really managing the urban water and reduce localized flooding and improve water quality for this area, and then restore ecology on this particular unique site, which includes improving the existing forest with local species, improving the wetland conditions so that those native wetland plants can thrive, as well as managing invasives. And then the most important part, access to really make it more accessible to the community, so they can enjoy the site and use it as a benefit for the community, which will improve public health, recreation opportunities, and really kind of build a place for community. So that's kind of all these different benefits that you see there on the right side. Next slide. So this is kind of iterative, so you have to kind of keep clicking a little bit. But as you can see, there's different drainage features, and in order to kind of use the site to reduce flooding, we would need to lift some of the water, take it out of the city storm drains and system, bring it into the site, and then that way allow it to flow in the site, and that will not only reduce some flooding, but also improve water quality, so it can kind of be filtered before it gets, allow for as much infiltration as possible and allow the overflow to go back into the drainage system and then be pumped out. So that's one of the critical elements. So there will be a small lift station to lift the water into the site from the storm drain. Next slide. as I mentioned, we did a very intensive vegetation survey to really identify what are the main, local type species that are already very large and mature that we want to protect. What are kind of some of the sites or different areas where we have Chinese tallow, which is an invasive that you kind of want to reduce and kind of manage and remove. And then kind of bring in, if you click one more time, Mary, and bring in kind of some of the more native species into those spots as we're developing the site. So kind of removing those and replacing them with more natural species. So that's goal number 2. And then we come to the next goal. Next slide, please. Really providing different points of access, and this is, the site is really well located for that. You can access from Paris Avenue, from Mirabeau. Mirabeau actually has a dual bike lane, separate bike lanes on each side of the street. From there, you can access this. There's a lot of residents around there that could walk to the site. So it really, you got to think through how can you make access safe, and how also can you, make it not overwhelming for the neighborhood. Next slide. With that, I hand it over to Atiana with Waterblock to talk a little bit about what we've done to get feedback from the community and what we've heard so far. Atiana?
Yes, thank you, Nina. Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. As Nina mentioned, my name is Atiana Cordova, and I'm the founder of Waterblock, and we've been leading the outreach efforts for the project. Next slide, please. So with a few slides that we're going to present today on the outreach, we're just going to give a brief overview of what we've done to date. So through our work, we started off with some stakeholder meetings. So we thought that it was very important to connect with the existing partners within the neighborhood and those that would be impacted by the project. So we held a meeting with the Flood Protection Authority in October, early October. Then we also held a meeting with the Orleans Parish School Board in late October and with Dillard University in November. And with Orleans Parish School Board, with their property being adjacent to the site, once again, we thought it was important to build upon this relationship. One, to understand what their goals are with their site specifically, but how we can actually partner going forward with the project. This was the intention with the 2 other meetings as well. After those stakeholder meetings, we also held a neighborhood canvassing event. And the point of this canvassing event was to talk with the residents and neighbors themselves that would be directly impacted by the project. So we started off by doing some surveys and door-to-door interviews in November. So just talking with residents about, one, if they knew about the project, and if so, what did they know, and understanding what their desires were for the site and what challenges or concerns did they have as well. Then we also distributed some yard signs throughout the neighborhood, so not just in the streets that directly are adjacent to the project site, but within the Gentilly neighborhood. So we placed those signs around the neighborhood just so that people can know that the project is coming and know how to further connect with us as the project develops. We also held some community leaders forums. So the point of this forum session or these forum sessions were to connect with existing neighborhood leaders that are already active within the Gentilly footprint. So we connected with some neighborhood association leaders to, one, make sure that they were aware of the project and to get their feedback early on as the project was developing. So this took place virtually. We had our first virtual meeting with them in November. Then we had a follow-up meeting recently in February 18th specifically, to get feedback even on this presentation and what things we can change going forward to make sure that the information is, one, accessible to the neighbors that live within the project footprint, but also to get their honest critiques on the work so far. We also held some pop-up events. So given our COVID reality that we're in, we knew that we were going to have to think differently about how we engage and got feedback for the project. So we held these pop-up events at high traffic areas within the project footprint to try and catch residents where they were already engaging within the neighborhood. So we marked some key points. So the first point was at the Oak Park Shopping Center. And through this area, there's a lot of retail stores near this space. And basically, we set up a pop-up area on the neutral ground where we were able to have some pop-up boards with questions to help us formulate what we would turn this project into in the coming months. And that really allowed us to, one, connect with the residents and neighbors, as mentioned before, who are already within this neighborhood, but also to share more information about the project and for them to meet the project team as well. We also held another pop-up event near Gentilly and Allegiance Fields near the Walgreens in that shopping and retail space, and we did the exact same thing that we did near Oak Park Shopping Center. And then our last pop-up event happened at the Norman Meyer Library in December, where it was actually a citywide voting day, but we were able to once again engage with residents where they already were engaged in the project footprint to get their feedback on the project so far and to collect some contact so that we can keep in contact with them as the project goes on. Next slide, please. So from all this outreach, we were able to gather some pretty important information, one, based on what the residents had concerns about, but also what some of their desires were. And from all this information, we basically took it all in and said, okay, now how can we use this information to inform the design, the physical design of the project? So from that, we came up with this topic of remember and reclaim. Given the historical significance of this project site, as Nina mentioned in our previous slides, we thought it was important to acknowledge this history of this sacred land that we're talking about with this project, but also to incorporate what the residents were sharing around their desires for physical activities, cultural activities, areas for children to play and gather in, sacred and reflective spaces, and clear signage and well-lit pathways and accessible pathways that all people can interact with. So this is kind of frames the program for our concept designs, and then I'm going to pass it back to Joel, and he'll share more information about that.
Yeah, thank you, Atiana. Appreciate it very much for you guys attending this afternoon. Again, I'm Joel Tillery, and I've had the privilege of leading the technical aspects of the project. I'm basically going to cover kind of more in depth of what Nina presented and the three goals of our project, which are managing urban water, restoring the ecology of the wetland area, and providing community access, along with all the other things that go along with that. So next slide, Mary. So first I want to cover the managing urban water aspect of the project. It is one of the key requirements of the grant funding source. So this is what we focused on a good bit in the work that we have done thus far. Our first step in that is looking at the city's drainage system and determining how we can reduce flooding by essentially storing or infiltrating more water into the project site. And we've utilized the city's existing PC swim model to model the hydraulics and the hydrology of the area. The location of the site is somewhat unique in that it's situated along or partially along the Gentilly Ridge, which is a fairly high spot in this area, particularly relative to some of the other GRD projects. But our site, you can see there on the image at the left, the drainage from the site generally flows either to the south or to the north. I'm kind of situated halfway between Sewage and Water Board's large lift stations, drainage pump station number 4 and number 3, which lift water into the London Avenue Canal. The slide at the center there is, or the image at the center there, are some simulations, the results of simulations for a 10-year rain event, somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 9 inches of rain in 24 hours. And as you can see there, large areas of Gentilly are inundated in that type of storm, and low-lying areas in particular. One of the things that you might notice here is that near the wetland site, there isn't that much inundation as you see in the kind of the lower left portion of the image. And that's because we're actually on relatively high ground relative to the surrounding neighborhoods, which is one reason it drove us to the concept of having to lift water from the city's existing drainage system and bringing it into the wetland site. Click again there, Mary. Just zooming in a little bit on the neighborhood surrounding the wetland site, there is a little bit of street flooding, as you can see here in these two highlighted circles. And those are two areas that we're focused on in terms of the benefits and evaluating the benefits of storing more water in the wetland. Next slide. Anita kind of talked a little bit about how we're planning on accomplishing that. Basically, we're going to tap into the city's existing drainage system along Pratt Drive and along Virgil Boulevard with some storm drains. We've coordinated a little bit with Sewage and Water Board as far as how to do that and standards we would have to meet in order to accomplish that. And just beginning at kind of the circles that you see there, number one is where would be a junction box located within Pratt Drive. We would tee off of that into a large storm drain that would function as both conveyance as well as kind of underground detention or storage. That would bring it to a pump station that you see there labeled as number 3. The storage is important because that allows us to reduce the size of the pump station and capture the kind of the peak of the hydrograph as the water is passing through the city's storm drain system. After the pump station, we'd be lifting the water into the wetland there. You see at number 4, there'd be a couple of different discharges, one into a relatively close by area, so as to limit piping and reduce the cost of the infrastructure, as well as you see number 5 there, we're planning to have a smaller pump station to recirculate the water through the wetland system. That would limit the stagnation of water, provide some flowing features for the community that visit the site, and that also helps with the ecology. Flowing water and mosquito populations don't necessarily go hand in hand, whereas stagnant water and mosquito populations tend to be problematic. So that's kind of just a little bit more details of the stormwater pumping system and how we've conceived that thus far. Next slide, Mary. Go again, next slide. Okay, this slide just shows that that the existing wetland is much lower relative to the surrounding grade. The elevations in the site are in the -5, -6 range, as opposed to the surrounding neighborhood at -1 or at 0 feet, NAVD 88. So that provides an opportunity for lifting water into the wetland and storing it. It's already somewhat of a detention basin. The utility is limited currently because there really isn't much of a drainage area associated with the wetland site, except for what falls on the site itself. And it looks like spell check got us with the number of million gallons, but the property can store, we've estimated from its current water surface elevation up to what we would lift it to, around 15 million gallons of additional runoff that we could capture there. So that's a pretty significant amount. Next slide, please. And this just shows that we've used the city's PC swim model, modified that to reflect proposed conditions, basically what I described earlier in the plan sheet that you saw from tapping into the city's storm drain system. That would eventually flow out from the wetland system via discharge structures and weirs and smaller storm drains that would filter it back into the city's storm drainage system and then out to the Sewage Water Board's larger pump stations. The image at the right just shows some of the benefits. So just think about this in terms of water surface elevations. The blue indicates reductions in water surface elevation or hydraulic grade line relative to existing conditions. So by pumping water into the wetland site, storing it there, we can reduce the water surface elevations by up to 3 feet in the city streets there nearby. Now there wasn't, as you saw, a significant amount of street flooding, but this provides more storage for adjacent areas and has benefits beyond just the project site itself. So that's what we're showing here with this slide. Okay, next slide. So getting into the restoring the ecology, Nina mentioned the existing wetland and reestablishing vegetation. There's basically three aspects of that we're looking to achieve. The first is establishing hydrologic zones throughout the project site. The existing site is not a very functional wetland. And so what we're going to do by managing the water is essentially establishing known hydrologic zones that are identifiable with different types of wetlands. So kind of from a primarily or most of the time inundated, what would be a zone 2, intermittently exposed, that would be, the ground surface would be exposed as opposed to, permanently flooded, up to areas that are, more of an upland area that are intermittently flooded. And so, from those areas that have water the majority of the year, flood frequency near 100%, you'd be looking at more of a cypress swamp or a water tupelo, as opposed to more of an upland, still a bottomland hardwood forest, but you'd see species more in lines with hickories and ash and oak trees, which there are quite a number of those types of trees already existing on the site. So, next slide. And the second aspect is there are a number of invasive tree, species out here. Chinese tallow, you see in the lower right, Chinese privet, kind of a shrub, and then there are also some understory species that are limiting the quality or herbaceous vegetation on the site. The Japanese stiltgrass. So an aspect is controlling and removing those species by selective herbicide management or mechanical removal as a starting point for the control of the invasives. I mean, it is an ongoing process. One of the things that we do to limit those invasives from removing, and you can click on the next slide, Mary. Next slide, Mary. Is to establish a robust planting plan. To go back in when we remove the invasives, to go back in with a robust planting plan that would include trees, everything from trees that would ultimately create canopy, understory trees like a Virginia willow or buttonbush, to shrubs, and then even understory vegetation like ferns and flowering plants like the Louisiana swamp iris. Those would be accomplishing both biodiversity as well as creating interest for the community that visits the site. Next slide. And then I think, from the standpoint of what you all have been waiting for, when you start to look at drawings and begin to see what this looks like on paper, what we have here is a series of 5 different exhibits, and they essentially reflect kind of an iteration that the design team has gone through. None of these are necessarily set in stone at this stage, and our process going forward is to engage with the community, start to solicit feedback on these more geometrical considerations. But as we flip through these slides, what you'll see are some common things. Number one is an access road that would bring people to the site, provide people, school children, people, educational groups with buses, people with disabilities that need closer proximity to the site so they can enjoy the network of trails and spaces that the programming will develop. That access road will be accompanied by entryways that will welcome people to the site. That's one of the things that we heard during the community engagement process is that people want to have a sense of welcoming when they come to visit what will essentially become a bit of a nature park, along with the management of urban water and just the ecological restoration aspects of the project. There'll be a trail network. Again, the geometry of that is subject to change, and as we work through that, we're taking into consideration, the existing location of good trees and good vegetation that are already there on the site. And then In and amongst all of the trails will be various program spaces to address the community feedback, having spaces for recreation, like an adventure playground for children, outdoor classrooms to provide educational spaces for individuals and groups. And then there are some existing uses of the site. There's some existing research that's taking place by the City of New Orleans Mosquito Pest Control Board. That's what you see there reflected in number 6. They have some active research for mosquitoes on the site. We're going to look to maintain those and enhance the access and use of those areas for those stakeholders. The next slide, Mary. I won't dwell on these too much, other than to just show you, and I think these are included in the drawing set that you all have received, and hopefully you've had a chance to review. But again, you can just see some iterations of access road, what that might look like, the number of parking spaces. None of those details are set in stone, and we're working on developing those and furthering those as we proceed with the design. Next slide. And you can see as we work through the concepts, they become a little bit more developed. One of the things that this shows that the others didn't is that on the northern end of the site, that would be on the left side. North is facing to the left in the graphic. It's actually rotated, but that's the lower end of the project site. It's got elevations in the -5, -6 range, and so that area would be permanently wet. And likely be in that hydrologic zone for the wetland that would be, flooded the majority of the time. So that's really more of a cypress swamp, or have water tube flows. And so to access that area, be a series of boardwalks that would be elevated over the site, and see kind of a concept of what that would look like. Both boardwalks to navigate across the site, as well as some places to gather and reflect in and above the cypress swamp that is to be created. Next slide. And just another iteration of the concept. We began to tinker with the access road and how people would come into the site, where people would park. We'd love some feedback from you guys tonight on from your perspective, parking spaces, the nature of that, and how we could incorporate that into the design going forward. One of the things that you see here that didn't see in the previous slide is that there'd be an additional local pedestrian access and an existing city right away, kind of at the lower left-hand side of the image there. Next slide. This is the last exhibit. A slight difference in the orientation of the parking, and we're thinking about how to orient the parking relative to the program spaces and where you would put the parking, whether near the entryway or the main entrance into the trail network. Kind of near the cypress swamp and the boardwalk system, or if you put the parking nearby where you have playgrounds and things for children, thinking about the use of the site and parents that would be bringing their children to visit the area for both for recreation as well as education. Next slide. And I think it just turn it over to Nina to wrap us up here. I think we're pretty much at the end of our presentation for this evening. But Nina, take it.
Yeah. So as you know, this meeting kind of is the end of the concept design phase. We then move into preliminary design phase, leaving a little bit of time there to really have some meaningful stakeholder events that we can kind of get a lot of input on now. These different types of features. That we want to lay out throughout the site, and to really get the feedback of what people like and what people want to see. So we really want to make sure we get plenty of feedback on this concept, so we can really have a sound preliminary design by July, and then kind of moving into final design and and then into at the end of the year, and then construction the following. So that's kind of the general schedule. With that, I turn it back over to Sarah or Mary.
Thank you, Nina. So we will open the floor to comments from committee members. I'll just take them in alphabetical order. Austin, any comments or questions?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I was hoping you would call on me. This is thanks to all the presenters. I mean, this is a really neat spot in the city and a really neat project. And it seems like y'all have laid a good groundwork for it. My first question, I guess, is, or most of my questions, and I'll just kind of, I was taking notes, so I didn't really organize this, but mostly for Joel, actually, because it seems like the success of this project is really going to hinge on getting the hydrology right. You know, the hydrology of the city pre-development created the bottomland hardwood and swamp habitat that once existed on site and that we're hoping to some degree restore. You know, the trouble with invasive species control and this sort of habitat restoration is that, you know, getting that frequency, depth, duration of inundation correct is going to cut down on long-term maintenance costs, and it's going to reduce, you know, any costs really past construction. So, you know, if we get it wrong, there's potential for serious invasive species control, mosquito control. I mean, you guys know you've already sort of addressed all of this in the preliminary level. I guess there's a lot of detail that perhaps is in your next phase of work around alternative analysis. I'm concerned by the need for a lift station because of the implications for long-term maintenance. So it'd be interesting to see what can be done in terms of storage and hydrologic restoration on site in the absence of that lift station. And I don't know if that can be done through, you know, gravity and weir flow or simply through, you know, the existing runoff. But I think it should be analyzed because that's going to be your low cost option for the project. And if it can achieve the goals of habitat restoration and public access while benefiting stormwater management, I think that should be explored. Otherwise, you know, with the lift station, we need to look at how much of the total cost of the project is related to that large wet well, as well as the lift station, because it's probably going to be a lot. And maybe you haven't done that detailed hydrologic analysis yet, but I'll be looking forward to seeing it. That's not a question. That's a comment.
Those are good questions and good thoughts, Austin. Nice to see you. Appreciate your comments spoken from like a true ecologist. You have me at a bit of a disadvantage as an engineer. Just to maybe put you at ease, we do have, you know, some wetland specialists that are engaged with the project and are working with us on the hydrologic zones and the vegetation planning and how that would come together. I guess in terms of, you know, the benefits for urban water management, you know, when we first looked at the site, we realized pretty quickly that, you know, the site is storing, you know, the water that is falling on it. You know, it's in a depression, basically. The area around it is built up. And so, you know, it's providing some level of service for just, you know, managing its own water and a little bit of the runoff that comes off of the backs of residents the houses that back up to it. But to achieving sort of meaningful reduction in street flooding, felt like we were kind of driven towards this idea of a lift station and capturing water and bringing it into the project site. We've done some preliminary budgeting and you know, the overall construction budget is $5.6 million. I think we can get the lift station done for around a third of that cost, around $2 million, and that's inclusive of the lift station as well as the stormwater piping and everything that goes along with that. So, kind of distributing the budget amongst the major goals of the project, kind of a third is kind of a sweet spot that we were trying to hit. In terms of
definitely one of the main goals of the grant too. So we kind of had to. That was kind of the really the forerunner of everything. So that was also kind of the governing piece to really make that happen.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. Yeah, for sure. In terms of like getting the hydrology right and managing the invasives long term, one of the advantages of the lift station that we see is that, while it does add a bit of maintenance, an O&M cost to the project long term, it does allow us to kind of manage that water level or dial it in and kind of have an adaptive management approach to the wetland and the water levels within the project site. So there's that, and that's the operation and maintenance of that, and where to set water levels. That's work that's coming more on the ecological aspects of the wetland restoration aspects. We don't want to put too much water in it and then negatively impact the existing vegetation that's there. So that's another consideration. Mm-hmm. Invasive control is a long-term endeavor. Our primary focus to manage that, and together with managing the water, is to get some vegetation growing and kind of close the canopy. That's one of the reasons that the invasives are there currently, is because there was some tree fall after Katrina, where these Chinese tallow trees from the residential neighborhoods kind of invaded and took hold and created some Chinese tallow groves. When we do the site visits and you look at the vegetation, you don't see a lot of Chinese tallow where there's a good closed canopy. You got the big white oak trees that are, there's some that are out there that are 54 inches in diameter. So that's a long-term effort, but one of the things that we're focused on is getting trees to outcompete the invasives as a strategy for controlling them.
Thank you for that comment, Boston. Any further comments?
Yeah, just one follow-up. And thank you for those answers. I can tell you guys are on top of the technical issues here. Is that it occurs to me that, in terms of us planting and the plans for the planting program, when it comes down to construction implementation, we might want to look at potential partnerships with Xavier, Delgado, the other universities who have, green infrastructure, horticulture programs, and similar. Because this might be a good link to the, workforce development program. And that's all I've got, Mary. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Austin. Next, we'll take Danny McElmurray from Parks and Parkways.
Hey, so I've sent in my comments from doing the design review, but just a couple of things that I did want to bring up for this purpose. In terms of the design, can you go back a page or to concept C? I guess it's more than one page.
Was it one of the concepts, Danny? A through E?
C. It's probably 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's good. So, looking at that, and I know one of the discussions has been talking about artwork and really bringing in that aspect. But what I don't see is maybe a trail loop along the levee itself, which would provide opportunity for education and experience along the toe of the levee. I know it would be difficult to put a path along on the levee itself, but at least there would be kind of a way to bring that into that whole education process of what the levee does and what it's for. And it would help create a looped experience instead of having dead end there at the levee. And a similar comment. I like this comment. This is why I want you to pull this one up. I like the idea of having the vehicular access being looped because it allows for bus drop-off much easier than, you know, having a turnaround in there. Takes up less room. But I am worried a little bit about so much parking being there. I know this isn't the final numbers, but I really would like for you all to make sure you look at what is your expected capacity in terms of the number of people who will be visiting the site by car versus the people who will be walking to the site or coming to the site by bicycle or on their own 2 feet. And then that said, you know, the pedestrian connections I think are going to be key to the success of this. It's not just going to be, you know, something for people to drive to, but I really think this is a good destination for people to walk to. And maybe there's a way to connect to the proposed, you know, the planned improvements on Elysian Fields as well. So, you know, how do people get to this site from Paris, as well as from Elysian Fields, as well as from Gentilly? You know, I know that goes beyond your site itself, but this is going to be really important. Is what's that experience leading people to this destination? And then I sent Rodrika an email just now. I hadn't zoomed in on some of the site designation images, and I didn't realize that y'all didn't have Parkway's property properly identified. Parkway's has about 50% of the exposure across the canal from this property. And the pedestrian bridge access from Warrington Drive along Stephen Girard used to actually be, it came through the Parkway's property. A portion of that sidewalk is still there. Some of that infrastructure is still there. So I think that pedestrian bridge, if you look over the first N in London, that bridge on that image, yeah, that's where the pedestrian bridge came across. That sidewalk may even still be there. It's just currently covered up by vegetation. So, yeah, I think there's a real opportunity to bring I guess that's the east side of the canal, and have the neighborhoods on the east side have pretty easy access. And that all depends on whether or not Sewage and Water Board will allow a flat bridge across, you know, and creating that pedestrian access and possibly bike access. I think that's a real opportunity, whether it's done as part of this project. I think it needs to be identified as, if it's not part of this project, as a future phase of this project that could really tie in, maybe when the school board property is brought into so looking at doing some future planning, not only what's on the project site now, but also what could it be in terms of connections and expansion possibilities. And then I think the other comments that I had for the plan were, let me back up. There's some typographical things that need to be fixed just for clarity purposes, and that's the bulk of my comments that you have in the middle.
No, those are all great comments. Actually, I just wanted to get back when we had met actually with the Orleans Levy District. They were not opposed to having kind of the gravel road along the canal at the bottom there, so that would kind of feed into what you're saying. So they're kind of agreeable to discuss something like that. So that could be considered. There is actually one panel of the London Avenue Outfall Canal there of the flat wall is actually a piece of art right there by where the Paris School Board property starts. It's pretty neat. And yeah, I think with the parking, that's also a comment that has been brought up. So I think we'll be reconsidering that, making that a lot less, scaling that down a little bit. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, Danny, we did look at that previous connection. The aerial photograph is a little bit misleading. So if you look at the parcel under the R of Warrington Drive, if you look at that kind of more triangular shaped parcel, there's actually not a house there. It's not listed as private property on the assessor's map. So that would be, we think, where the bridge would go or used to be. But we do think that that might be better to do at the time when the school is actually using the site. Because you can see how that would put the other end of the bridge, you know, on the school property. So that definitely seems ideal for a future phase. We did also discuss with Dillard about whether they were interested in having a connection from their campus directly into the project. And they were concerned that maybe this opened up access to their campus in a way that they really had not intended. So they chose not to move forward with that idea, but we're definitely open to revisiting that with the school board.
Yeah, just, you know, I think the opportunity, you know, like this image identifies Parkway's property as Dillard property, but it's really not. And so we have a good amount of space in the back that we could actually, you know, readjust that alignment and come off of Stephen Girard and basically come straight across like where the A is in London Avenue, Outfall Canal. The A in Avenue, you can come straight there and cross over there and be in the project area rather than being at the school. So I think there's some opportunities there based on a difference in ownership that's not really acknowledged in this graphics. And so I think that changes, even if it is a future phase, that really kind of changes the outlook for that access way from the east.
Yeah, it does. And that was another question. We'll just have to follow up with you guys at a future date. I meant to check with you to see how often y'all use that, because clearly it's used as an access, you know, by Parks and Parkways. So meant to check with you guys about how often y'all use that.
Just the short answer for that, we've actually recently just repaired that gate and have created barriers to keep vehicles from using that area because we had a break-in back there. So we use that as an exit point, but right now we have it blocked off where we can't use it either. So it was used during construction while Dillard was doing their wetland interventions, their stormwater interventions. It was used as part of their access route, but we have since closed it back off. So.
Okay. Well, good to know. Any further comments, Danny? Thank you so much for your very thorough comments that we received on the report. I appreciate that.